A Russian soldier named Daniel sat in a bombed-out house in eastern Ukraine with 5 other men. No mission briefing, no supplies, no way out. Within weeks, 2 of those men were dead. Not killed by Ukrainian drones, not by artillery, not by a sniper's bullet. Killed by their own comrades, in cold blood, inside a building they were supposed to be defending together. This is not a story about the fog of war. This is a story about what happens when an army breaks from the inside. And right now in 2026, the Russian military is not just losing on the battlefield, it is rotting from within. Desertion, fratricide, missile failures that cost $50 million and blow up garages. A summer offensive that collapsed before it even started. 1.37 million casualties. And soldiers so desperate to escape that they are bribing prosecutors to send them to prison because prison is safer than Ukraine. This is the full picture, and it is worse than anything Vladimir Putin will ever admit on Russian state television. Let us start with Daniel, because his story tells you everything you need to know about the Russian army in 2026. Daniel is 24 years old, born in the mountainous Transbaikal region of eastern Siberia. Difficult childhood. Father left when he was 12. Drug problems, arrests. But he pulled himself together, graduated from a railway technical school, built a career in transportation, and was earning 80,000 rubles a month, roughly $1,100, which is a decent wage in rural Russia. By 2022, when Putin launched his invasion, Daniel had zero interest in the military. He had a job, he had a life. He wanted nothing to do with the so-called special military operation. But life in Russia in 2024 became complicated. Daniel claims he was being set up for a drug arrest he did not commit. He fled St. Petersburg, nearly 3,000 miles from his home. With few options through friends, he was recommended to enlist in the Russian army. He traveled to Belgorod. He signed the contract, August 2025. His life now belonged to the Kremlin's war machine. He was initially assigned to the 60th Self-Propelled Artillery Regiment. In the lottery of the Russian army, this was a relatively lucky draw. Artillery units operate at a distance from the front lines. They give you a fighting chance of survival. The truly unlucky ones end up in frontline infantry assault squads, where the estimated survival time is 1 to 2 weeks, not months, weeks. Daniel lived with his artillery crew. He ate with them, slept alongside them. For 6 weeks, he was essentially an intern, monitoring shell casings, cleaning equipment, stationed in the Belgorod region of Russia rather than inside Ukraine. He and his crewmates would cook hearty meals. They would pool money to order food delivered by local taxi drivers. By Russian frontline standards, it was almost comfortable. Then he made a fatal mistake. He got into a fight with his commanding officer. He accused the officer of verbal abuse and threats. He did the worst possible thing in the Russian military. He went over his superior's head. He sent a message over Telegram to a higher-ranking officer demanding a transfer. He did not know that this was effectively a death sentence. Daniel thought he would be moved to a different artillery unit. Instead, he was reassigned to the 82nd Infantry Regiment and sent straight to the front lines. As he later told the independent Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, it was scary to end up in the 82nd Infantry Regiment. Everyone talked about it as a place where people were sent as punishment. If you didn't follow orders, if you didn't obey, they'd tell you, watch out, you're going to the 82nd Regiment in Vovchansk. That is exactly where he ended up. Vovchansk is just over the Russian border in Ukraine's Kharkiv region. It does not appear often in military headlines, but Russian forces are present there, and multiple Ukrainian units are actively working to prevent further advances. Daniel would spend exactly 2 months in this area, February 17th to April 17th, 2026. The most dramatic 2 months of his entire life. He was taken to a deployment point with several other soldiers who had also been transferred as punishment. One had insulted an officer, another had stabbed a fellow soldier in the leg during a fight. One member of the group was not even Russian, likely Uzbek, who had been promised a Russian passport if he served for a year. This is a standard trick that Russian recruiters use to pressure ethnic minorities from Central Asian nations into joining the army. The vast majority will die at the front lines and never see that passport. The group was held in a classroom for a week and a half under surveillance. Guards were posted to prevent escape attempts. Then, without warning, Daniel and several others were ordered to move out instantly. No mission briefing, no preparation. He was handed a basic backpack of supplies, paired with a fellow soldier, a roughly 55-year-old man Daniel called Grandpa, loaded onto a quad bike, and taken to his first frontline drop-off point. He still did not know where he was going. He could not turn around. He could not run. During the river crossing to reach their objective, he watched guards threaten to push a wounded man into the water if he could not cross on his own. He watched another soldier get threatened with being shot in the knees for refusing to walk. This is the Russian military in 2026. This is what the Kremlin calls a special military operation. After crossing the river, the guards abandoned Daniel and Grandpa, left them alone, and then the Ukrainian drones found them. Daniel and Grandpa were moving under anti-drone blankets at night when a drone, possibly a Baba Yaga heavy lift model, found their position. It hit Grandpa, ripped off a limb. Daniel took shrapnel in the leg. In the chaos, Daniel ran. He left Grandpa behind. He moved from dugout to dugout, linking up with other isolated Russian soldiers in similar situations, lost, undersupplied, cut off from any coherent command structure. This is resupply in the Russian frontline in 2026. FPV drones, normally used as weapons, repurposed to carry bottled water and packets of porridge, crashing them into the ground near frontline positions, scattering supplies across the dirt. This is how Putin's soldiers are being kept alive. It is one of the most primitive and unreliable resupply systems in modern military history. Daniel eventually linked up with 5 other soldiers. Their names were Sena, Kit, Shmimel, Shah, and Amelia. They occupied an abandoned house in the operational area. And here is where the story descends into something that belongs in a psychology textbook about what happens when men under extreme psychological pressure are stripped of all structure, purpose, and hope. Some members of the group found a large bottle of homemade wine. 2 of them got drunk. They started playing music and yelling, potentially giving away their position and putting all 6 of them in danger. Amelia asked them to stop. Shah, who boasted about his time with the Wagner mercenary group and claimed to be afraid of nothing, snapped. He started screaming. He fired his machine gun at the walls, through the windows. Inside the house, Daniel, Kit, and Shmimel left for another building. They continued to hear gunfire from the first house. Then Sena and Shah followed them. Another argument erupted, and Sena killed Shah. He told the others that Shah had killed Amelia back at the first house, so he had taken him out in retaliation. 6 men, now 4. Not because they encountered a Ukrainian assault team, not because of a drone strike or an artillery barrage, because 2 Russian soldiers drunk on homemade wine broke under the psychological pressure of the front line and started killing each other. The violence did not stop there. A few weeks later, Sena and Kit started drinking again. Daniel was asleep. He woke up to gunfire. Sena had shot Kit in the leg. Non-fatals. The group returned to a routine of scavenging for food, searching basements for supplies, surviving in silence. Then Sena decided that Kit was not pulling his weight, not gathering snow to melt into drinking water, not helping cook. He shot and killed Kit in cold blood. While Kit was begging for his life, Sena even tried to pressure Shmimel into carrying out the execution, asserting dominance over what remained of the group. 4 men had become 3. 3 had become 2. Sena then turned on Daniel and Shmimel, called them worthless, said they needed to storm weapons, seize houses, find other people, started pointing his weapon at them, continued drinking and shooting the walls. Daniel and Shmimel reached the only conclusion available to them. They killed Sena while he slept. 2 survivors remained. They barricaded themselves in a basement with a working radio, some food, drone batteries they had scavenged to charge the radio, and nothing else. For weeks, Ukrainian forces eventually returned, set the building on fire, smoked them out. They surrendered immediately and were taken prisoner. This is the story of one small group of Russian soldiers in one small corner of one front in 1 month of this war. And according to Novaya Gazeta, it is entirely representative of what the Russian military has become. Now zoom out. Because the story of Daniel and his unit is not a tragedy of individual madmen. It is the systemic output of an army that has been consuming itself for 4 years and is now approaching the point of irreversible collapse. The numbers from May 2026 are catastrophic. Ukraine's defense reporting revealed that Russia suffered 33,760 casualties in May alone. That breaks down to 1,089 casualties per day. And this followed 2 consecutive months, March and April, where Russia's monthly losses exceeded 35,000. In the first 5 months of 2026, Russia burned through approximately 130,000 soldiers. These are casualty figures not seen by any major power since World War II. But here is the number that exposes just how catastrophically Russia's offensive is failing. In May, Russian forces managed to seize approximately 88 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Ukraine counterattacked and liberated 68 square kilometers. Russia's net gain was 20 square kilometers. Divide 33,760 casualties by 20 square kilometers, and you get 1,688 dead or wounded Russian soldiers for every square kilometer gained. According to Interfax and the open-source military analysis organization Deep State, Russia's net gain may have been as low as 14 square kilometers, pushing that ratio to 2, 411 casualties per square kilometer of territory actually held. Putin's grand September deadline for capturing the Donbas is not just unrealistic. It is a fantasy being constructed inside a bunker by a man who has been told only what his subordinates think he wants to hear. This is why the Oreshnik missile launch of May 23rd and 24th, 2026 matters so much. Because it tells you exactly the psychological state of Vladimir Putin as his summer offensive collapses around him. For months, the Kremlin marketed the Oreshnik, the name translates to hazel shrub, as a next-generation hypersonic nightmare. A system so advanced, so fast, so devastating that its deployment would send shockwaves across Europe and re-establish Russia as one of the world's most fearsome military powers. This was not just weapon development. This was psychological warfare. The Kremlin did not even need to use it. The fear of it was the weapon. Here's what the Oreshnik actually is. Analysts believe it is based on the RS-26 Rubej, an intermediate-range ballistic missile developed in the 2000s that underwent several test launches in the 2010s but never officially entered service. The Oreshnik is believed to be a variant of this existing system with slightly reduced range but hypersonic capability, exceeding Mach 5, with Ukrainian military assessments suggesting peak speeds approaching Mach 10, 12,300 kilometers per hour. It carries up to 6 independently targetable warheads. On paper, it was everything the Kremlin claimed. Then Putin used it. He did not use it because Russia was winning. He used it because Russia was losing. The Victory Day parade on May 9th had been a humiliation. No tanks, no mobile military column, the first time since 2008. A handful of troops and a few fighter jets while Putin stood before a diminished crowd and spoke of heroes on the front lines. The world's media mocked the display. Even Russia's own pro-war bloggers were horrified. Putin's domestic approval rating, as measured by the Kremlin's own state pollster Vetsium, had dropped from 78% in December 2025 to 65.6% by April 2026, a 12-point collapse in 5 months. When your own pollster publishes a number like that, the real mood on the ground is considerably worse. Putin needed the narrative to change. He needed something spectacular. He ordered a massive coordinated attack on Ukraine, 90 missiles, 600 drones, an estimated $400 million total cost. The crown jewel would be the Oreshnik, the finale that would silence the critics and remind the world what Russia was capable of. It struck the small city of Belivka, approximately 50 miles south of Kyiv. Not a major military installation, not a strategic facility, not anything of operational significance. According to open-source intelligence analysts, the Oreshnik struck a cluster of Soviet-era garages. $50 million, one missile, a few sheet metal garages. But here is where the story gets dramatically worse for the Kremlin. According to the Institute for the Study of War and Ukrainian open-source analysts, Russia may have fired not 1 but 2 Oreshnik missiles that night. Before the Belivka strike occurred, Ukrainian monitoring channels detected a second high-speed, high-altitude ballistic missile launched from inside Russian territory. All the signatures pointed to an Oreshnik. It was heading towards central Ukraine. And then it disappeared. No impact. No explosion. No reports from civilians. No footage. Several hours later, the truth emerged. The first Oreshnik had crash-landed in Russian-occupied Donetsk, near the Avdiivka or Yasinovata area, where Russian troops are actually stationed. The wonder weapon may have struck its own forces. This is not the only time the Oreshnik has failed. Including the November 2024 test strike, Russia has now fired 4 Oreshniks at Ukraine, 1 crashed in occupied Donetsk, 1 hit garages in Belivka. That is a 25% confirmed failure rate on a missile that costs $50 million per unit, carries nuclear-capable warheads, and is supposed to be the ultimate deterrent that makes NATO lose sleep. Kaja Kallas, EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, called it exactly what it was, a political scare tactic and reckless nuclear brinkmanship from a country that had reached a dead end on the battlefield. French President Macron condemned the attack. European Council President Antonio Costa called it a merciless display of brutality directed against civilians. Russia's own nationalist bloggers, the Z-bloggers who have supported this war from day one, called it expensive metal into the ground and pathetic show-off nonsense. In one night, Putin destroyed the only thing the Oreshnik had going for it, its mystique. The world did not know exactly how effective this weapon was. Now they do, and they are not afraid. But the Oreshnik failure is just the most dramatic single moment in a broader collapse that has been accelerating throughout the spring and summer of 2026. Russia's artillery losses in May 2026 hit a new record high, 1,993 artillery units destroyed in a single month. These are units Russia cannot replace. Its modern artillery stockpiles have been depleted. What remains is Soviet-era towed artillery that must be positioned close to the front to be effective, making it an easy target for Ukraine's drone swarms. The artillery advantage that Russia held for much of this war, at one point 10 guns to every 1 Ukrainian gun, has collapsed in some areas to near parity and in others to Ukraine's favor. Russia's tank losses tell an equally revealing story, but not in the direction you might expect. In May 2026, Russia lost only 63 main battle tanks, a record low. This sounds like good news for the Kremlin. It is not. It means Russia has stopped using its tanks. Ukraine's drone campaign has been so effective at destroying armor that Russian commanders are actively refusing to commit tanks and armored vehicles to frontline assaults. Entire Russian units have rejected orders to advance in armored vehicles because of drone coverage. Infantry, moving in small infiltration groups of 2 or 3 rather than coordinated mechanized assaults, has become the primary tactic. And infantry moving in small groups in drone-saturated terrain does not take territory. It dies in place. Russia's vehicle losses behind the front lines tell the real story of what is happening to the summer offensive. On May 31, 2026, Ukraine set a new single-day record by destroying 524 Russian motor vehicles and fuel tankers behind the front lines. 2 days earlier, on May 29th, Ukraine had set the previous record at 483 vehicles. By month's end, Russia had lost more than 8,000 vehicles and fuel tankers in May alone. This is Ukraine's logistics lockdown campaign. The strategy is brutally simple. Russia uses trucks and tankers to move fuel, ammunition, and equipment from staging areas to the front. Destroy the trucks, the ammo does not arrive, the artillery runs dry, the assaults fail. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense has allocated approximately $113 million specifically to units executing this campaign, and the results are visible in every casualty ratio and territorial gain statistic from the spring. MLRS losses in May 2026 reached their highest level since 2023, 63 units destroyed. Russia has been substituting its depleted stockpiles of modern rocket artillery with North Korean Type 75 systems and improvised Soviet-era variants. Some units are even strapping MLRS systems to ground robotic platforms in desperate attempts to give them mobility. The record destruction numbers in May demonstrate that none of it is working. Ukraine destroyed 42 Russian air defense systems in May, the highest monthly total since June 2024. This matters because every air defense system destroyed opens a new corridor for Ukraine's long-range drone campaign inside occupied territory and inside Russia itself. Ukraine's Third Army Corps has claimed that Ukrainian drones now effectively own the skies over Luhansk, a region Russia insists it controls completely. Ukrainian drones penetrated 205 kilometers behind the front lines in Luhansk, striking targets deep inside Russian-held territory while Russian air defenses failed to intercept them. This is the battlefield context in which Putin's September deadline for the Donbas exists. Russia needed its spring offensive to break through Ukraine's fortress belt, the chain of 4 heavily fortified cities stretching approximately 50 kilometers across the far edge of Donetsk. Without that breakthrough, the summer campaign has no platform from which to launch the decisive assault Putin has promised. Russia did not get that breakthrough. Instead, it lost territory in April, a net loss of 116 square kilometers, and barely held even in May and March. The spring ended with Russia down approximately 80 square kilometers of net territory while absorbing 100,000 casualties in 3 months. The September deadline for the Donbas is not a military objective. It is a propaganda statement from a man who has no military path to achieving it. And now the desertion crisis. Because this is where the story of Daniel and of every Russian soldier like him converges with the strategic picture. According to a September 2025 United Nations report cited by Novaya Gazeta, over 50,000 Russian soldiers had deserted the army since the beginning of Putin's invasion. That represented approximately 10% of the total troops Russia had deployed to Ukraine at that point. 16,000 had been caught and imprisoned. But separate reporting by United 24 media suggested that in 2025 alone, approximately 70,000 Russian soldiers were expected to abandon their posts. Russian activist and deserter Daniel Chebykin, speaking to the Kyiv Post, estimated the total desertion figure, including those who fled before formal induction, at between 300,000 and 800,000 individuals. 300,000 to 800,000 people who looked at what Russia was asking them to do in Ukraine and said no. The Russian military's response to desertion has been to catch deserters and send them back to the front. Not to prison, back to the same unit, the same front, the same kill zone they fled from. Suspended sentences are common, which means that soldiers who desert once are often returned to service and desert again. Hence the extraordinarily wide range in the total desertion estimate. Some individuals have deserted multiple times. But now a new phenomenon is emerging that reveals just how desperate the situation has become. Russian soldiers are engineering their own imprisonment. A loose network of lawyers, typically former military prosecutors, has developed inside Russia. These lawyers are not trying to keep soldiers out of prison. Their clients want to go to prison, because prison in the brutal calculus of a Russian soldier in 2026 is safer than Ukraine. The strategy works like this. A deserter contacts a lawyer. The lawyer identifies an investigative department, ideally one with low caseloads in a region far from the front, that has an incentive to take on a desertion case because it boosts their conviction statistics. The lawyer arranges for the deserter to be tried in that jurisdiction. The investigator gets their case closure numbers, the deserter gets a prison sentence of 5 to 15 years, and the deserter gets off the front. As one lawyer who spoke to Medusa on condition of anonymity explained, a deserter comes to us, we sign him up, and we go to a sensible investigator we know needs cases. The geography is huge. An offense is investigated where it ends. A man could have run from Luhansk to Sakhalin Island, and the investigator on Sakhalin handles it. We look for investigative departments that desperately need numbers for their statistics. This strategy only works about 20% of the time. In most cases, deserters are caught and returned to their units without any formal criminal process at all. But the fact that thousands of Russian soldiers are actively trying to manipulate the legal system to get themselves imprisoned rather than returned to Ukraine tells you precisely what the conditions on the front are like in 20. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in an open letter to Putin, revealed that Russia's killed to wounded ratio in Ukraine stands at 63% killed to 37% wounded. In any modern military, the wounded to killed ratio is typically inverted, more wounded than killed, because modern medicine, body armor, and evacuation systems save lives. Russia's ratio means that soldiers sent to the front are nearly twice as likely to die as to be wounded and evacuated. When the three available exits from the Russian army are death, reaching age 65, or a prison sentence, and when the most survivable option is clearly the prison sentence, that is what rational people choose. Russia's recruitment is in freefall. At the start of 2026, Russia was recruiting approximately 800 soldiers per day, down from 1,000 to 1,200 per day in early 2025. Russia claims to be recruiting 30,000 soldiers per month, but this figure does not keep pace with monthly losses that have been exceeding 33,000 to 35,000. The math is unsustainable. Russia is consuming soldiers faster than it can produce them. The Kremlin's response has been escalating desperation. Signing bonuses have been raised repeatedly, but years of war-driven inflation have eroded their real value. In occupied Ukrainian territories, mobilization pressure is intensifying. Students who previously had deferrals are losing them. Military registration is being made mandatory, and raids are being used to press Ukrainian civilians into the Russian army. Universities are operating under secret recruitment quotas, with guaranteed diplomas used as inducements for students to enlist. According to Radio Free Europe, Russian authorities have been pulling drunk men off the streets and processing their military enlistment while they are in no state to consent. Russia is also recruiting foreign fighters. An estimated 27,000 nationals from over 130 countries have already fought for Russia since 2022, with plans to add at least 18,500 more. North Korean troops, soldiers recruited from Zimbabwe and Kenya, drunk men from Russian street corners, university students promised their diplomas, ethnic minorities promised passports they will never receive. This is the recruitment pipeline of the Russian military in 2026. And in the internet shutdowns, in the crackdown on Telegram, in the state-run messaging application forcibly installed on Russian phones, in the FSB's unprecedented information control campaign that produced approximately 2,000 mobile internet shutdowns per month by end of 2025, more than the entire rest of the world combined experienced in all of 2024, you can see the shape of what comes next. The Kremlin is not managing a war. It is managing a population on the edge of withdrawal of consent. The independent Levada Center found in February 2026 that 67% of Russians believe the country should be moving toward peace negotiations. 2/3 of Russia's population wants this war to end. Putin's approval rating, even by the Kremlin's own inflated measurements, has fallen 12 points in 5 months. A retired KGB officer named Andrei Bazukov, not a liberal dissident, a former intelligence professional, publicly warned that the state was now working against its own people. A rapper named Potaka told his audience that the country was sliding back into the Stone Age. A blogger in Monaco named Victoria Bona posted an 18-minute video addressed directly to Putin describing a population that had been robbed of everything and was still being robbed. It went viral inside Russia. There are no open protests. Not yet. Russia's security apparatus is too effective for that. But the conditions for something larger are assembling: economic contraction, casualty numbers the state can no longer credibly hide, a generation of young men choosing prison over service, a wonder weapon that blew up garages, a parade without tanks, and a September deadline for the Donbas that every military analyst in the world knows Russia cannot meet. Chabikin drew the parallel to Russia's experience in World War I, when soldiers concluded they were dying for goals that had nothing to do with their own interests, when entire units deserted, when the military structure itself began to collapse, when the collapse contributed to the revolutionary events of 1917. The timeline then ran from catastrophic offensive failures in summer 1916 to revolution by February 1917. Less than a year. The Russian army in 2026 has suffered 1.37 million casualties. Its wonder weapon costs $50 million and hits garages. Its summer offensive is consuming 1,000 soldiers per day for 20 square kilometers of net gain per month. Its soldiers are choosing Russian prisons over Ukrainian front lines. Its recruitment is pulling drunk men off street corners and canceling student deferrals. Its internet shutdowns are making the war impossible to ignore in Moscow and St. Petersburg. And somewhere in a basement in Vovchansk, 2 Russian soldiers sat with the bodies of 4 of their comrades killed not by Ukraine but by each other and waited for a Ukrainian unit to come and take them prisoner. Daniel and Shmemel surrendered immediately. They are alive. They are out. Tens of thousands of Russian soldiers are still trying to figure out how to follow them. The question is not whether Russia can capture the Donbas by September. The question is what the Russian army looks like by September. And based on every number, every testimony, every leaked assessment, every analyst report, and every drone strike record broken in May 2026, the answer is considerably smaller, considerably more desperate, and considerably closer to the kind of collapse that changes not just a war but a country. Share your analysis in the comments. What do you think happens next inside Russia? Does the military hold, or are we watching the beginning of something much larger? Subscribe to PPR Global and turn on notifications. We cover the full picture every day, the numbers the mainstream media buries, the stories that tell you where this war is actually going.